the latest. Thank you for your love and support. I appreciate you all. Now, the same people that are chasing us are themselves confessing and criticizing their people for the bad things that they have been doing to us. For decades, the African has suffered in the hands of other people because people believe that the African is soft. So for that matter, whatever that we have here, we don't even know what it is. They are the people who discovered us. They are the people who have the knowledge of the world because they have been here and they understand everything. People who came 250, 200 years ago are the ones that are determining the fate of people who have lived billions of years on this earth, if not. And who allows that? It is the African. The video I am about to share with you is about what happened in French Parliament, where a Frenchman is so angry at what they are doing in Africa, asking why they always interfere in the affairs of Africa. Why do they always rise against leaders who are trying to make sure they give the African independence? Now look at what they did in Ivory Coast in the year 2000. What they keep doing to us, the bombing and other things they keep doing on the soil of Africa, just simply because they do not want the African to rise and regain its control. But when these are the people that are teaching us morals. These are the people that the African youth believe so much. This is where we believe that is the only place that we can ever be to get our sovereignty.
It's endured beyond colonization because of its agreements. France intervened 60 times in 24 countries in 60 years. For the greater good of African potentates, and for the preservation of natural resources, deemed essential to the French economy. That's what France Africa is. And all of this continues despite the hypocritical vows of each president of the French Republic to put an end to the opaque ties that bind France and the leaders of its former colonies. And if by chance an African government shows even the slightest inclinations toward independence, as was the case in Côte d'Ivoire at the end of the elections of the year 2000, the life insurance of the military presence, French turns into a factor of destabilization and weakening for that government. On this subject, allow me to question you about the exact role of France in the bombing of Buick in 2004 and the events that followed. Madam Minister, I note in this regard that, in the proceedings concerning the bombing, investigating Judge Sabine Carras is requesting the referral of the ministers of the time, Dominique de Villepinte, Michel Elliott-Marie and Michel Barnier, before the Court of Justice of the Republic. Are we dealing with a botched dirty operation that, this time, would mix the blood of our soldiers with that of Ivorian citizens? Do you intend to open the archive so that the truth may finally come out in this affair? All these methods are moreover the roots of France's deplorable image on the African continent, and the reason for our lack of credibility in Africa, given the past, which is ours. It is the principle of non-interference that should be the guiding line for our country, which, among others, has committed the worst crimes and the worst horrors on the African continent. It plundered its inhabitants, its resources, its money. And this has continued for decades. This must stop. This is not the path Macron's presidency is taking. France's colonial habit is still largely preserved in certain African countries, as we were able to see again in 2019 in Chad, in Djibouti, or in Côte d'Ivoire. To give only 3 examples, we were able to observe, indeed, very strong remnants of these Franco-African principles in Chad, where the French army bombed in February last year a column of vehicles belonging to opponents of the Chadian dictator Idriss Déby. This zealous head of state protected against all logic by France, which thanks him by allowing him to remain in office without being denounced. Even though he had been there since 1990, can a country like ours allow itself to protect a man who runs a state as if it were his property, and who does not hesitate to eliminate his opponents, to practice torture, to carry out kidnappings? We are still waiting for clarifications on this matter. Perhaps it is unspeakable we will continue to demand accountability. But Chad is not the only country still under French protection. As its head of state, Ismail Omar Guelleh says, despite the changes in the region, nothing is moving in Djibouti. When it comes to making small gestures for Djibouti, the French state does not hold back. Recently, Mohamed Kadami, a Djiboutian opponent with political refugee status in France, was indicted and risks being sent back to Djibouti in contempt of French law to satisfy the Djiboutian regime, or even to exchange him for a prisoner, Djiboutian, who is said to have a role in the Sarkozy-Gaddafi affair. And let us take a third example of France's protection toward its loyalists. Ivory Coast. After having established that one cannot describe Alassane Ouattara's coup d'état in 2011, France allowed the new head of state to send Laurent Gbagbo to the International Criminal Court after 7 years of proceedings, during which Laurent Gbagbo was in pre-trial detention, in total contradiction with the recommendations in this matter of the European Court of Human Rights. He is kept under conditional release, without being able to return to Ivory Coast after his trial, where he was acquitted, which is in total contradiction with all principles of law. It seems that Ivorian pressure, and above all French pressure, made it possible for the main opponent of Ouattara to still have obstacles in his way, to prevent him from returning to his country. On the eve of the 2020 presidential elections, French interference in the internal affairs of countries like Djibouti, Chad or Ivory Coast is unbearable and is not worthy of our country. Bilateral defense agreements, although they have changed in form since the 1970s, therefore allow France to maintain a presence in its former colonies, which raises serious problems of integrity in the use of our armed forces. No one came out looking better in this recent history, and France would do better to work differently in Africa than to use its army to guarantee a stability of dictators favorable only for business and destructive for the peoples. And what can be seen when it comes to France-Afrique is that France practiced is a double standard. That is not sustainable in the long term. For example, concerning the Dugako massacre in Ivory Coast, for which commemorations took place yesterday, of several thousand people, by the supporters of the current president Alassane Ouattara, the French army did not intervene. On the other hand, when it comes to Idriss Déby, and when he asks France to attack his opponents, we rush in to bomb them. Whereas when, in Mali, an attack leaves nearly 160 dead in a village, France does not move. Yet we signed a cooperation agreement in defense matters between France and Mali, which was ratified in 2015. What would France do? Why has it been so quick to attack the Chadian opponents? Why does it not react when it comes to massacres of Malians or Ivorians? Why does France persist in a strategy in Mali that is failing? I think the government would do well to shed light on the situation for us, and to come back to what the Minister of the Armed Forces recently said. Florence Parly, I quote her, "Will we be led to intervene every time we are asked?" No, she replies. The decision ultimately falls under the judgment of the President of the Republic. In this case, it was not desirable for a country heavily contributing to the fight against terrorism and present on other fronts to be destabilized, with the ultimate consequence of an increase in our overseas operations commitments. That is clear. As for Nigeria, since it is not a former colony, or since it is a former British colony, it is therefore French influence that is important. Proof, all the same, that a defense agreement remains a powerful instrument for integrating into a territory, notably to help drive arms sales in the country. The question, the rapporteur told us, fairly in veiled words, let us not forget that our current foreign minister was the Minister of Defense who sold the most weapons when he was in charge. The problem of France's security and military obsession in West Africa is that we miss the real issues by insisting on the armed forces. You seem to forget that violence is never the root of a problem, but rather a consequence. It'll go even further. If violence is the consequence of deep problems, trying to solve violence with more violence, without working on its roots, generally only makes things worse. If we look at the Sahel-Saharan belt, we see that no military action has been able to respond satisfactorily to a political and social question. This area is studded with conflicts intertwined with religions, land ownership and competition for access to primary resources, such as food and water, and to public services. Access to education and healthcare has been, it must be said, ruined by the various structural adjustment policies of the 80s and 90s, carried out by the IMF, following the over-indebtedness crisis of the countries of the South, caused by the very architecture of the global economic system, as indicated by the Committee for the Abolition of Third World Debt. Can we imagine that peoples would let themselves die without education or health care? Because the dogmatists of liberalism prevent them from doing so. These destructive policies have left their mark. These countries bled dry, had to abandon their public services in order to better repay their debts on the orders of rich countries. An economic colonization, in short, the frustrations and hatreds, some of them created by colonization, for others predating it, were able to be instrumentalized and contributed to destabilization and to the underdevelopment of many countries in Africa, beyond the problems of public services, very often failing or even non-existent. The question of competition for resources among the different users of the land allows us to see concretely the absence of state regulation of these problems. The weakness and perhaps also the corruption of these states also lead to this kind of violence. Especially in the context of climate change, some specialists consider, for example, that desertification in Mali, in connection with climate disruption, pushes herders into competition with farmers much more than before, and this competition linked to the ecological disaster creates even more hatred. And since the herders come mostly from one ethnic group and the farmers from another, with religious differences in the background, coexistence is undermined and the social fabric completely torn apart. Resources such as water are also increasingly a source of conflict. Agriculture in the hydrographic basin of West Africa uses about 75% of water resources, but development is beginning to create conflicts of use. These are necessary subjects to take into account for the development of states. Moreover, hydroelectric energy, which is a huge and positive potential in Africa, could soon, if it is not thought through and implemented in a coordinated way, individually beneficial, posing major problems with the multiplication of dams which in the current state of affairs could lead to issues in downstream areas and countries. These energy issues are all the more important because Niger, for example, Bishasakapa, hier Algeria to depends 80% on Nigeria for its energy. France's assistance in supporting the construction of a dam on the Niger River must take these realities into account, which could eventually create tensions between the two countries. More broadly, it is the energy sovereignty of countries like Nigeria that will need to be significantly improved. The goal of wealthy countries is, as always, to maintain their energy supply source, which is done at the expense of the holders of these resources.
The man just opened up, told the truth, and dropped a bombshell on his people and asked for the people to face the law. As Africans, we should understand one thing. We need to unite. It is our unity that can defeat these people. Until we, the youth, start to understand that we are the future leaders and our destiny is in our own hands, we will continue to be here because the leaders that we have, like the ECOWAS chairperson, Julius Maada Bio rightfully said, instead of them to protect the people, they are protecting borders. And the border symbolizes the interest of the oppressor. So our leaders know very much that they are not doing anything in the interest of the people. Yet you, the youth, you are sitting here believing every speech that these same leaders, these democratic elected, who are thinking about themselves, about the oppressor, about their bank account, their assets that they have with the oppressor, thinking that they are here in your interest. And you will always be the one who come online with the little data that you manage to get to defend these same people, simply because you belong to such parties. These people are the reason to which Africa we are not moving forward. They are the reason to which Africa we can never get to the destination that we want to be because they always interfere. They always make sure they come after the leaders who are rising to give us total freedom. We are seeing the same resolution being passed in EU Parliament telling us who should lead us in this 2026, this 21st century. The same people who are preaching morality to the world. Watch when the president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, was taken by somebody, by a same democratic preacher. And at the end of the day, we saw it was not because they love you, the people, not because they want you to be free, but because they are after their interests. And the oil was the reason to which they were after the people in Venezuela. The same preaching that they gave us during the time of Muammar Gaddafi. Where is the promised land that they gave to the Libyans after they helped took out the leader who was uniting Africa? And you still have Africans elite today still calling Muammar Gaddafi a dictator. And when you rule for long, what happens to you? Because mentally the African is still enslaved, that we will always believe the narrative of our oppressors and we believe that they should have the final say. We need to wake up. We need to wake up. The time is now. They never left us anything that is good. And that is why they will continue to use religion to divide you. And when we tell ourselves that these things that these people left are for division and not for our progress, we do not understand. Look at what narrative they brought in Nigeria, saving Christians and leaving Muslims. So if your husband is a Muslim or your wife is a Muslim, they should save you and leave the person? Is that what you are telling me? Africans, we need to wake up. The time is now. They are the reason to which we are not moving forward. And until we unite to fight against that force, we will never get anywhere. They interfere in the affairs of Africa. They decide who leads us. All our leaders are comfortably moving around, going to them in and out because they serve their interests and not us. They will never allow any leader who will do anything good for you and I to be in office to even last for a first time, to talk of the second, under their same system they claim is democracy. If democracy is for the people, why did we decide that this is the kind of person we want to lead us and they have a problem? Why won't they go to North Korea to decide who leads them in North Korea? Because they know the power of the people in North Korea. Because the African is powerless, that is the reason to which everybody decides the fate of the African. And until we unite and do away with these democratic elected, we will never get anywhere. Because these leaders do not serve the interests of the African. And these are not my words. This is what the ECOWAS chairperson, the president of Sierra Leone, Julius Maada Bio, openly told the world in Davos. So if these leaders that we are supposed to see them protecting us are rather protecting the borders, do we need them to continue to rule us? We are the only ones that can set ourselves free. United we stand, divided we fall, and united we keep standing forever and ever. The greatest enemy of the African is mental slavery. So let's decolonize ourselves from mental slavery. Let's keep sharing to educate our brothers and sisters. Together we make Africa great for ourselves and the next generations that are going to come. So that's the latest around the world, in Europe and in France.